Yes, greetings, my brothers and sisters. It's a joy to be here once again. We've got what? We've got the 17th, the 17th of February, 2022. It's Thursday, and before I go on, I'd like to say please subscribe to this video. I like this video. Share it. Leave your comments down below, and subscribe to our channel, Crispy Motep, and spread the word. We're trying to grow. At the moment, we've got 148 subscribers, and we want to try and get, small baby steps. We're trying to get, the 200, and then hopefully down in the year we should reach 1,000. And when we reach 1,000, we can start to do live broadcasts around the world and so on, and we can have live chat with you. And it helps the algorithms if you like the videos and you share them and you leave comments, and click on the bell as well for notifications as to when we're posting up next. Anyway, brothers and sisters, we're here to speak about the late and great Coxsone Dodd, Sir Clement Seymour Dodd, known around the world better as Coxsone Dodd, or sometimes as Coxsone's Downbeat. He was born, of course, in Kingston on January the 26th, 1932. Last month, the 26th, which was January, would have been 90 years of celebration of life. And 90 years is a landmark. 90 is a landmark age. So I felt it was my duty to come here today to actually speak about such a great man. Coxsone really began in the sound system arena. I've mentioned this many times on the radio. He really began in the sound system arena as far back as 1948 in Kingston. He toured around the country because in those days, sound system operators, they wasn't confined to one area. They, toured around the whole island of Jamaica, and even in some cases, they toured much of the Caribbean. So in those early days when Coxsone Dodd was starting out with his Coxsone Downbeat, so Coxsone's Downbeat sound system, there was people like Tom the Great Sebastian, who's one of the pioneers of sound system operating. He also had King Edwards the Giant, who would follow Coxsone Dodd later on into productions, as well as Drew Creed the Troll Giant also would follow Coxsone Dodd into productions as well later on, producing local artists. And you get to see why Coxsone is a trailblazer, because there's many things he's done which heralds him as the trailblazer of Jamaican music. He started with producing records as far back as 1956. I've seen some reports that say 1956, some reports that said 1957. But initially, when he was actually putting out records, making records for public purchase, it was as far back as 1957. And he was actually only doing it through his sound system, Coxsone's Downbeat. That's what producers were doing at that time. They were releasing records solely for the sound system and to topple the opposition and to flop the opposition. So, for example, if Coxsone Dodd released his own records from local budding artists on his sound system, he would use it to face off other, sound system operators, people like Tom the Great Sebastian, Drew Creed, King Edwards, even a very young Prince Buster, the Voice of the People was there as well, But also, what they would do in those days, they would go to the Jamaican government that saw a lot of Jamaicans over to America, so they'll go to Florida and to New York on farming work. They'll go out and do agricultural work and so on, work on the fields, and it wasn't just confined to producers, it wasn't just confined to sound system operators, it was actually confined to people in the country as a whole. So if you wanted to work and someone's in Jamaica, because it's a small country, and there's a saying goes, the dollars weren't running in them days. So what would happen was that you could volunteer, and the Jamaican government would put you down you put your name down on the list, and then they'll fly you out to New York and Florida in America for you to actually do farm work, for you to actually make some money. For Jamaicans, sound system operators, of course, like Sir Coxsone Dodd and Drew Creed and others, would use it to their advantage, because they'll go out there and at the same time, as well as working in the fields out there, on the the farms there, fruit and veg and so on, they would actually use it as a great opportunity to pick up the latest records locally. So, for example, if Coxsone went to New York, he'll pick out something at that time. So you're talking 40s and 50s. So you're talking with people like Professor Long here, who was a big influence on many of Jamaican many of the Jamaican, sound system operators at that time, and then eventually when they went into production later on in the 50s and into the 60s, and those guys would become great, influences, not just Professor Longer, people like Little Richard, Fats Domino, Nat King Cole, B.B. King, the Rhythm and Blues men, Smiley Lewis, Roloney Harris. There's so many names. Not all the names that no one can't quite come to me at this moment in time, but you know what I mean. Those names from the R&B era of the 40s, people like Louis Jordan of the 40s going into the 50s. So people like Louis Jordan will be another one of those guys as well. And the Jamaicans would go there. The Jamaican sound system operators were budding. So Coxsone at the start of his career as a sound system operator, as well as people like Thomas the Great Sebastian. They say Thomas the Great Sebastian was one of the best sound system operators at that time. And if you won against him, that you know that you're on your way to becoming the champion. Unfortunately, Thomas the Great Sebastian passed away in the 1950s somehow. Nobody knows why he died, but some said it was suicide because at that time his girlfriend had left him. So he took it upon himself, he took it to heart and took it upon himself to commit suicide. Anyway, Coxsone Dodd's mother, Doris, was also a great music enthusiast, and she would sometimes select for Coxsone's downbeat player records. And some say that she was the very first female disc jockey in Jamaica. Coxsone Dodd's mother's Doris. When Coxsone would go to America and farm work, working in the fruit and veg section, he would sometimes send a diagram, or should I say, not sometimes, he would send a diagram of how he wanted his sound system to look. This is before he actually set the sound system up to go there for his mother to actually build it, because his mother was also a very good builder, believe it or not, of sound systems. She was really a trailblazer herself in that sense, because her mother, I mean, could you imagine a woman building sound systems now? It's like, or in them days, it was like, totally amazing. But Coxsone was showing diagrams of how he wanted his sound system to look, and it sent it back to Jamaica, and his mother would actually copy it and replicate it to the best of her ability, and get the materials and get others to help her to build the actual sound system. And of course, it grew from 1948. Coxsone at that time was only about 16. 1948, 16, but he was just doing it around the house, and then he go into America. So from 1949, 1950, 1951, that's when it became very serious, and then that's when a lot more of the guys, of the sound system guys, came to the fore. So you have people like Lord Cruz, you have people like Lord Matador Daly. He doesn't get mentioned very often. He will also go into productions, Lord Matador Daly, and so on. But the very first recording session for commercial release, because at that time the Jamaicans were making records, but they were making calypso records by local musicians, but people like Laurel Aitken and people like Lord Tanamo. Lord Tanamo was Jamaican, Laurel Aitken was from Cuba, but he came to Jamaica as a 13-year-old and would sing at hotels for drops of pennies and so on. And those were local artists that people like Dada Tararo, who set up the Caribou label, were produced on his label. There was other artists as well, from local artists. Lord Flea was another one. But at that time, they were selling LPs and so on, and sevens, but it wasn't really, the Jamaican recording industry hadn't actually started at that time in earnest. It never really started until the late 50s, around 1959, when Coxsone, another example of his trailblazing exploits, went to the Federal. At that time, if you wanted records to be made, you'd have to go to Federal Studios or JBC, which was run by the Jamaica government at that time. So someone's Coxsone go to JBC, or if you couldn't get to JBC, go to Federal and record his first wave of singers, local artists. So you have people like Owen Gray, Lasso Perkins, people like Shelly Doofus, people like Roland Alfonso, the Drew Droppers, Hersan Sang and his City Slickers, which is one of the pioneers of backing bands in those days. Hersan Sang was a band leader, and those were the guys that really backed the first recordings on the island. So you're talking from, say, 59, even maybe before that, for the sound system. Because as I said before, the Jamaican producers were making records for the sound system to face off with the opposition, to topple the opposition. They were making it for public commercial release, for you to actually go in the shops and buy it. This came in 1959, when the likes of Coxsone went into the studios and produced some of those guys I mentioned, like Owen Gray and so on. And in actual fact, Owen Gray's On the Beach was actually recorded in 1959. was the first special anywhere in the world. So Coxsone again showing why he's such a trailblazer. Holding the first session for commercial release for people to actually go out and buy the records in public, in the shops. And then again, showing it again with getting Owen Gray to create a song, highlighting the success and the status of his Sir Coxsone's downbeat sound system. That's why it became so famous, because of the Coxsone downbeat. And then eventually he would go into recording and set up Studio One in 1961, 1962 at number 13 Bradford Road, Kingston. Now, of course, honeyly called Studio One Boulevard. So we've got to make that a mention as well. And so it's such a great honour to speak about such a great man. He's left such a great musical legacy. He's a trailblazer in every sense of the word. I mean, he's done so many things. And there's so many stories I've still got to tell you now before I enter out of here. And so that's the sum of it. He got his name Coxsone because he was a great cricketer as a youngster. He loved cricket. He was also a very good cricketer, and because of this, his followers and his friends proceeded to call him Coxsone after the great player Coxsone, the great cricketer Coxsone. So Coxsone was named after him. I actually forgotten his first name now, the cricketer, but I remembered it before, but I've lost it now. Too many things to remember, but Coxsone was named after the great cricketer, Coxsone. And so that's how we got it, because he loved cricket himself and he was quite good at it as well, and so on. And so, as I was saying before, about when the Jamaican producers transformed from operating the sound systems and going into the studio now, this happened in 1959. Coxsone was the instigator of it, and certainly one of the instigators, and Drew Creed went into production at that time as well, 59, 60. Then you had people like King Edwards for Giant. He recorded people like Eric Monty Morris and people like the Scatterlights down in the 60s, and a few Higgs and Wilson who also recorded for Coxsone. This is before Studio One had opened, because it was, as I said, the studio came about 4 years or 5 years after Coxsone started making the records for his sound system, the top of the opposition, and it became serious as a business after 1959 when he took people like Owen Gray. And I must also remember to give a mention to Phyllis Beckford, because his song Easy Snapper is one of the very first songs recorded for public purchase, for the public to actually purchase it in shops. Of course, also produced by Coxsone Dodd before Studio and opened and at Federal Studios in 1959, and that seminal, groundbreaking recording session in 1959 at Federal Studios. So it's so important to mention that. And then the list of artists who recorded for Coxsone is like as long as anyone's arm. Deborah Wilson was a very young child prodigy when he found his way to number 13 Brentford Road. Not long after it opened in 1961, 1962, as a young 13-year-old, after being discovered by Alton Ellis at school, then he was told about his greatness to Coxsone, and Coxsone, almost immediately signed him in a 5-year contract and nurtured him as a young boy, as a young child star, into one of the greatest singers of all time in Jamaican music. People like Higgs and Wilson, who I mentioned before, also recorded for Edward Seaga for World Records. Edward Seaga went on to become the Prime Minister of Jamaica, but in the early days, he was also a record producer, and he produced Higgs and Wilson's classic Manio in 1959. You had people like Shelly Dufus, who I mentioned before. You had the Maytools, who recorded in the ska period. You had the Wailers, and talking about the Wailers, when those early albums that you see the Wailers on the front covers of some of their early albums with the suits, that was actually purchased by Coxsone. Coxsone looked after the artists to make sure that they had the right clothing, they had the right appeal, and also when he was building Studio One, because the Wailers came to Studio One in 1963, so a year or two after the studio was actually founded, and Coxsone proceeded to create and to build a room upstairs of the studio for the Wailers, especially for the Wailers to stay there, for them to stay overnight. If they're tired, they can sleep there while they're rehearsing and practicing songs. And so Bunny, Peter and Bob, and the likes of Beverly Kelso and Cherry Smith and Junior Breathrate were there. Initially, it was a 5-piece combo that the Wailers had. You had Peter, Tosh, Bunny Wailer, Bob Marley, a female singer by the name of Beverly Smith, another female singer by the name of Beverly Kelso. So Cherry Smith, Beverly Kelso, the two female singers, Junior Breathrate, another male singer, who went on. He moved to America, then subsequently died there in 1999. It was in Miami, And then you had, of course, the main three, Peter Tosh, Bunny Wailer, Bob Marley. Eventually, Cherry Smith left the group. Junior Breathrate moved to America. And then Beverly Kelso, it is said that Bob Marley didn't think that Beverly Kelso was quite good enough for the group. He wanted the Wailers to move in a different direction. So as a result of this, he took Bunny Wailer and he took Peter Tosh away from the others, and then he formed like a second wave of the Wailers. Now this time it's a trio. So you had Peter, Bunny, and Bob. He went to America in 1965, Bob Marley, to spend some time with his mother, because his mother, Sedella, was living out there. And he spent some time out there in the mid-60s. And when he came back with a guitar and with some new ideas to write some social conscious songs about the black struggle, because that was around the time of the civil rights movement in America. And of course, the Rastafari movement in Jamaica was becoming bigger and bigger, with the likes of Plano speaking to Bob about this, and speaking to Bunny Wailer and Peter Tosh and some of the other musical artists out there at that time. Some converted to Rastafari, some were like slightly in the middle, some were the other side, but they still had certain Rasta concepts, because there's so many root songs, and not every artist who converted to Rastafari, or should I say, yes, not every artist who actually converted to Rastafari didn't sung roots. Some of them were Rastas, but they still sung roots, if you see what I mean. So I hope I make myself clear. So some artists who didn't actually convert to Rastafari still sung root songs, because the move and the mood got them. So they removed the sing about Haile Selassie, about the future for black people, where we're coming from, our past, our present, our future. And also, when the Wailers met Lee Perry at Studio One, he got them to write about the sufferations of black people, not only in the Caribbean, but in the diasporas around the world. Like, so in the Afro-Latin communities in South America, and Afro-Caribbean communities, not just Jamaica, but places like Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic, Cuba, and so on. And of course, in the motherland of Africa, and even down under, where the Aborigines lived in Australia. So you got the Wailers, Lee Perry, with his forward thinking, a man, a genius, full ahead of his time, got the Wailers. He sat down with the Wailers and got them to write about these things. And then when the 60s came into the 70s, and the Wailers would find Perry and he recorded them. As you notice, a lot of Bob Marley's and a lot of the Wailers songs were produced by Lee Perry around that time, because this before Lee Perry had the Black Ark studio. So he got them to sing and to write songs about the black struggle. Of course, in America as well, because Lee Perry was really conscious. And of course, with the Rastafari movement, the dosage they got, the tutorage, the indoctrination they got from that, as well as Scratch's guidance and Mortimer Plano's guidance, because Mortimer Plano taught the Wailers about concept about bringing Rastafari themes into the songs, and also Joe Higgs, who taught them harmonies and close tight harmonies and how to sing. And Joe Higgs also got them to sing consciously about Rastafari. So the Raiders were fully stacked in terms of being taught the Rastafari way. So they had it all. And then also Coxsone did the same thing for the Heptones. He helped the Wailers with a room, with the clothing and stuff. He did the same thing with the Heptones. When the Heptones went there after the Gay Lads left, because the Gay Lads were there in 1965, 1966, just as Ska was going into Rocksteady. So Rocksteady sold the Ska down, and that was around the time when the Gay Lads left and branched out. And then the Heptones more or less went to Studio One around that time, after working for BJ Kalnick, Cowtown Records, after being referred to them by members of the Pioneers. And then so they wanted to become superstars. So working for a small producer like BJ Kalnick wasn't really going to be the answer for them. So they found a way to Coxsone Dodd Studio One. That's what everybody went to. That's like the Motown of Jamaica. If you didn't go to Studio One, then it was a real rare thing, because you can count on one hand how many artists didn't actually eventually either start at Studio One or went there afterwards. Everybody more or less went to Studio One. I can only think of people like Jimmy Cliff and Desmond Dekker and a few others who didn't actually go to Studio One and recorded there. So many artists. Maybe I would say 70% of the artists around at that time recorded for Studio One. You see, so it was really, really you had to be there. You had to record for the label and so on. And so, Coxsone ensured that he created a room for the Heptones and so on. And he built a room upstairs next to where the Wailers' room was, and then ensured that the Heptones could stay there because he loved the harmonies. Coxsone said many times that the harmonies were close. Vocal harmonies of the Heptones blew him away. Said he never heard anything like that. The close harmonies of, well, it's 3-part harmonies. The lead is mostly Leroy Sibbles. You got Barry Llewellyn in the background, the late and great, and of course you got the living legend, which is Earl Morgan. So those two, Earl Morgan and Barry Llewellyn, backing up the great Leroy Sibbles, it's like a marriage made in paradise. You can't get better than that. So Coxsone saw that and he said, I've got to keep this group around. So he built a room upstairs next to where the Wailers was. And then he said, yes, you're my group. More or less, when the Wailers left in 1967 to set up their Wailing Soul label, then that's when the Heptones kind of came to the fore. So it's funny. As soon as the Heptones went to Studio One, then the Gaylords left. And now, as soon as the Wailers left, then Heptones went to Studio One. So it's almost like they missed it. One group leaves, another group comes and replaces them. It's like quite an extraordinary set of events, but that's how it goes sometimes. And, you know, as I said to you, the Scat Arts were very instrumental at that time because Coxsone loved music, and then he wasn't really musical trained, but he loved music. He loved the sound of music. He loved the way music was played. So he ensured he got the very best musicians around the island to come to Studio One and to work for him. And even before he opened up Studio One, Clue J and the Blues Blasters were recording his stuff in the doo-wop days, the R&B, the shuffling days of the, say, around 56, 57, 58 time. And then when Coxsone opened up Studio One, they became the first backing band there around 59, 60. You see, and then they more or less morphed into the Scatterlights. And then other groups came after, like the Soul Brothers. When Jackie Mittoo kind of demised in 1965, he went a bit. He had a mental breakdown. Then he found his way to Bellevue Mental Institution in around 1960. I believe it was around 1960. Probably 1965, around that time. Then he passed away after getting into an argument with somebody at the Bellevue Hospital there in 1969. But what a great musician he was. You've got people like, of course, Lord Creator, who recorded for Coxsone in that time as well, the ska era. You had people like, I mentioned Shani Doofus earlier. You had people like Jackie Opel. Jackie Opel wasn't from Jamaica. He was from Barbados, but he had a great voice. Wonderful, excellent, beautiful tenor voice. A bit like, very similar to, they call him the Jackie Wilson of the Caribbean because he had such a wonderful voice, and he also had wonderful stage presence, and he'd do the splits, he would do the turn. It was just like a Jackie Opel, a Caribbean equivalent to Jackie Wilson from America. So Jamaica was really star-studded and had such great artists, as well as the Caribbean as well. And those few that came from other Caribbean islands to come to Jamaica, for example, Lord Creator, you know, and Lord Creator and Jackie Opel. They just made Jamaica their own. They really did. And they really got ingrained in the music and was around Coxsone when Studio One became the biggest thing in the world at that time. The biggest thing in the Caribbean, one of the biggest musical labels and biggest musical stables in the whole wide world. And a country of under 3 million people can produce such music like this is just, it's someone's bringing tears to their eyes. And I'm so proud to be of Jamaican heritage. You know, my father used to tell me a lot about Drew Queen and Coxsone Dodd in those days, because Drew Queen and Coxsone Dodd are the trailblazers of Jamaican music. Without these two men, I don't believe that Jamaican music would have existed, and not in the way it has today. Because a lot of the rhythms you're hearing now in Jamaican music, in bashment and dancehall, comes from Studio One. Yeah, and Andrew Treasure Isle as well, but especially Studio One, because their rhythms are standard rhythms. And Coxsone Dodd really, he was ahead of his time, coming up, getting his musicians to think about those types of rhythms. And even though he wasn't musically trained, it was such a good thing to know that he was around. He was able to acquire the services of such great musicians. You can go to the studio and conjure up so many great rhythms and so many great melodies like that, and write so many great lasting songs like the songs that they actually conjured up, you see. And I mean, we could speak about Coxsone Dodd all day. You know, I think in May the 4th will be exactly 18 years since he passed away. Born 26th of January 1932, passed away May the 4th, 2004. So he was 72 when he passed away. And he passed away into the hands of the great Jennifer Lawa, who was also a great singer at Studio One, and she would sing a lot of backing harmonies for Studio One. And she came to Studio One's attention in the late 1970s, and she would back a lot of the artists around there at that time when the studio updated their tracks and they went to various multiple tracks, because initially it was only a couple of tracks, and Coxsone by the end of the 70s had multiple tracks in the studio, so he was able to record all sorts of songs. You see, people like Enid Cumberland of Keith and Enid, another one of the early duos that recorded at Studio One for Coxsone, that I did mention them before, but Enid of Keith and Enid, she worked at the studio as well. Coxsone was very good to people. He would just see somebody on the street, and if they could sing a bit, and he was told about, oh, you know, Sir Coxsone, that guy over there is got a good voice, or that lady over there, that young lady over there has got a good voice. Why don't you go and listen to her? Or why don't you, hear what she has, he or she can sing? And Coxsone would go and listen to them. And when you go and listen to them, sometimes he would just give them an opportunity to make one song. And maybe that only one song might put some money in their pocket for them to buy some food or to pay the bills. But he was like that. If he liked you, he liked you. And he was an opportunist. And there's not many producers like that now. I think the only one who comes close to him is Bunny Lee. He would just see somebody down the road, and if they're struggling, if they can sing, come to Studio One and make us a record for me. Sometimes there's only one record those artists have made for Coxsone and for Studio One. They one record. And then maybe if they're good, they come back again and make another record. And sometimes only just one album they've made. But because of Coxsone's generosity and kindness to these artists, their legacy and their legend, they've become legends in their own right and become like cult figures. Because Coxsone's made them that. Because one song they did for Studio One, oh, you did that. You're the one who did that song for Studio One that time. So Coxsone's given so many things back to people who of lesser means, people who are sleeping rough in the streets. Some of them have gone to Studio One and stuff and made one song and be able to make a living. So he's done some great things. I've heard so many stories about that great man, Sir Coxsone Dodd. And I'm going to be here. I'll always, whenever I can, come on radio, come on here on social media. I make videos about what a great man he was. A lot of people said that he didn't pay the artists money. Always Sandy sings his praises. Always Sandy says that. Another great artist at Studio One, Always Sandy, said that Coxsone Dodd, you could get money from him, but you had to sign for it. He said that a lot of artists didn't sign for their money, so they believe that Coxsone was ripping them off. But Always Sandy said that you could get money when you make records at Studio One, but you'll have to go and sign for it. And once you sign your name down on a piece of paper, then you get your royalties. But not a lot of artists realise this. Always Sandy said it many times in interviews. Even the other day I was listening to an interview he did recently on YouTube, and he said that Coxsone didn't rip anybody off, but they'd have to go and sign their name down to actually get some money for it. And because a lot of artists weren't doing this, as a result of this, a lot of them missed out on lots of money. So that's one of the reasons why a lot of them some have gone to the grave bitter of Coxsone, some will resent him now, some are still alive, have some bad things to say about him. But Always Sandy is a very honest guy. I trust what he says, because Always Sandy seems to be a very genuine guy, and I believe what he says to be true. You see, and down in the year we're going to make some more recordings about Coxsone Dodd, because you can't speak about such a great man in such a short space of time, And like I said, he was so good. You find work. If you couldn't sing, he'd bring you to the studio. You could work in the back at the garden at the back. You could make food. They had a canteen inside the studio. If you could cook, he'd give you a cooking job. He would give you a cleaning job at the studio. He'll give you a job in a pressing plant. He'll give you a job in a printing section, because the Studio One's a big complex. It was like almost like a massive university. You had rooms there, so you can go in there, and then if you're struggling, falling hard times, if you couldn't sing, if you couldn't play a musical instrument, Coxsone would definitely find something for you to do at the studio for you to make some money. He was such a great man, and we don't have men like that around anymore. And people who say bad things about him, I will always come in here and address it on radio or address it on here, because I'll always say good things about such a great man as Sir Coxsone Dodd. And my dad used to tell me a lot of things about him and Drew Creed and some of the other sound system operators. He used to tell me that when he was in Jamaica as a kid, that he used to follow them, and they used to tour not just in Kingston but around the whole island. So all the various other parishes, Coxsone would go to those parishes and and play their music. And even when they started taking up production in the late 50s and the 60s, they'll still go around and tour the island, and even sometimes tour other parts of the Caribbean and get their music out there and let people know that, look, this is the sound system culture now, you see. But Coxsone is such a trailblazer, he's trailblazed so many things. He's trailblazed the first recording session for public release, for commercial release in Jamaica. He's trailblazed musical instruments and backing vocals. He's he's trailblazed the sound system operating. He become one of the first sound system operators. And he's trailblazed so many things. Trailblazed the first black man. Let me say it again. The first black man. The second black man, but the first black man to have his own proper. Because Lyndon Pottinger had his own studio. He was a black man in the 50s and 60s, but he was often like Studio One. Because Lyndon Pottinger didn't hang around for long. He's only around for maybe 5-6 years. Coxsone was there for 40 years producing records. You know, he started in around 1961 at Studio One, and until he passed away in 2004. So that's what, 43 years. 43 years. You know, so that goes, and he's been in the industry for a lot longer than that. He's been in the industry for about 60 years in total. 60? No, not 60 years. About 55 years. Yeah, about 55 years. So it's almost 60 years he was in the industry for. Anyway, brothers and sisters, we could speak all day, all night, all evening, all afternoon about this great man. And don't forget, as I said to you before, like the videos, share the videos, leave your comments down below. Subscribe to our channel, Crispy Emotive, spread the word. Don't forget to click on the bell for you to get your notifications as to when we're posting our next videos. And this is video 99. The next one will be 100, and I'm hoping and praying that we can do one on Dennis Brown to cap our 100 videos. So, brothers and sisters, you take care of yourselves, keep wearing your masks, and keep social distancing. Crispy loves you all. Adios, Alva, Alda Verce, Salam, Hotep. Peace.